So you want to know how to journal for self-improvement. My compliments. The world needs more people like you. Now, I don't throw around praise lightly either, so please don't feel like I'm trying to stroke your ego. Far from it. In fact, some of the suggestions you're about to discover in this video might rub you the wrong way. And that's because a lot of people out there give poor journaling advice, and that can get into your procedural memory, which means that you repeat it again and again and come to believe it. I mean that a lot of people out there don't even discuss what the self is in the first place, and that can lead you down a track of disaster so deadly you wind up trapping yourself precisely in the prison you're trying to escape. So if you're ready for the lowdown from a self-improvement journaler with decades of experience, let's dive in and ask, what is journaling anyway? Sounds like a silly question, but here's the reality. If you don't pause on questions like, what is journaling, you miss a huge opportunity. So let's look at the word first and foremost. I mean, it sounds like a silly question, but how many people actually stop and ask, what is journaling anyway? I don't know if you've noticed, and it took a while for it to jump out at me, but the word journey is in journaling, and it comes from the Old French journée. Forgive my Old French pronunciation here. I don't know exactly if it's correct, but it's very, very important. It is literally moving from one place to another, and that's a really important thing. So an initial exercise that you can do is think about that. Where are you now, and where do you want to be? And that can help you be a very, very good self-improvement journaler because you're literally thinking about it as a journey. Now, let's look at this prickly question. What is this thing called the self anyhow? Improvement? How can you really improve yourself if you don't know what that is? This is a tricky question, but well worth exploring. For example, many studies have shown that our sense of self is an illusion. And if you add more nuance to the noise of this question, what people really mean is that yourself is constantly changing. Is that true? I don't know. But if the self is a target, then it is always moving. And how do you improve something that's always moving? Well, you start to look for patterns, and that's what journaling helps you do. Now, a book called Happiness Beyond Thought by Gary Weber is really one of the first places I started to think about this way, and it helped me with my journaling practice. As Dr. Weber explains in Happiness Beyond Thought, the number one portal to change is capturing an image of the pattern and then interacting with it. So journaling about what you eat, for example, is one powerful way to do this. And it's one reason why I shared so much about my own misadventures with diet and then later updated my misadventures with other diets on my Self-Improvement Supercharger blog when I talked about the carnivore diet and what happened with me. So these are patterns that are produced by what we eat, and it just circles us back to the initial exercise I suggested. But now change it a little. What transformation do you want to happen to your energies as a result of using your journal for self-improvement? What are the patterns that you notice, and what changes do you want to have to those patterns take place? And then you can separate it down to individual aspects of your life, such as what you're eating and how it affects your mood. Now, you can't always have it the way you want, because sometimes, and when I think about the carnivore diet, some real nasty things happen to me as a result, and I'm paying the price for all of that. I'm glad that I experimented, but nonetheless, I have to rethink everything in order to get back on track, insofar as there is a track in those patterns to find my way back to. But journaling is a huge part of how that works and how that you can optimize the process. Diet's just one way to do it. You can get very, very specific about what you want, but the trick is to actually want those things. And a simple way to test what you want is to try to come up with 5 reasons why you want a particular outcome, and then add 5 reasons why you might not want those outcomes at all. This can help reveal the nature of your thinking, and often we just don't have enough reasons to undertake various goals. This exercise reveals the lack of why we might want to go after something, and then realize why we fail, because we're just not that committed. So it's a little bit brutal. It reveals the truth about sometimes very fickle decisions, and it helps you avoid and dodge a lot of bullets. It certainly helped me. Few things have rewarded me as much as keeping a journal to track my dreams. Now, sure, there's often a lot of mumbo jumbo in the scenarios that the dreams produce, but you can think of the material as better than tarot cards. Rather than adding some kind of mystical woo-woo process that, somehow has some special meaning in the sky or whatever. You simply just write down and ask questions around what the dream material might help you think about, as if you're interpreting these cards, but without any sort of woo-woo projections. And I really want to stress that, because often people who are scientifically minded like myself, we reject cool ways to just generate ideas, and for good reason, because they often are very, very empty. But I like to explore them with this sort of spirit of, I don't have ideas, I can generate ideas, and it's as simple as remembering what it was that I dreamed last night and play around with those images. And because they're my images as opposed to tarot images, they're much more personal, and it involves a kind of active recall that exercises your memory. And if you can't recall anything, I have information about how to remember your dreams on my blog. Now, you can also journal about overwhelm, how you don't tolerate it, how that you're working towards tolerating it, and describing the situation in words gives you metacognitive insight without having to go to a therapist. Just be sure not to judge yourself, and if you do judge yourself, underline or circle anything that looks like self-judgment. And then journal further about why you think you use such self-judgment framing. You can also ask the journal about the history that might go into the language that you are using with yourself. When I did my PhD and my MA and all that stuff, I had to constantly journal about why that I am judging myself and why I have imposter syndrome and all this sort of stuff in order to keep moving forward. It was very, very revelatory, and it helped bring up things from the past that I needed to deal with. So I highly recommend this, but of course, if you need therapy, don't skip it. Please go and get help if you need it, by all means. But consider keeping a journal to help amplify anything you do in therapy. Now, one thing that I found really, really beneficial is to write a memoir. Now, I published mine, The Victorious Mind, but you don't have to publish yours. You can still benefit from journaling in a structured way about your life. And you can think about it in chapters and start at the beginning and go up until the present day. Dedicate one page to each grade in school, for example. I tried this many times, and I've done it again recently. I'm surprised by how over and over and over again, more and more material comes up. I mean, I remember details recently about my friend Eric, who tragically, he died in a skateboard accident, and, it just was really, really terrible. And I thought about my friend Ryan, who was the person who introduced me to Eric, and it just gives an opportunity to honor so many individuals. I mean, Eric's mom was really cool. She would have us over for lunch. I remember her making tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches, and it was an opportunity to feel gratitude. Gratitude I wouldn't have felt if I hadn't done the exercises. And even though he died, and it's really sad, the memories of his crazy skateboard antics that ultimately led to his early demise, grateful for that too. He was a human out there taking risks, and he had a lot of fun. So no matter what happened during my chaotic childhood, his mom was really helpful to me, and he was very, very inspiring. And his mom was like an angel sent during that time when I had a babysitter who really fed us on a lot of food that made my stomach so ill. But I had these moments of peace whenever we were invited over there for real nourishing food, and always his inspiration to get out there, take action, live life to the fullest. Now, I've talked about gratitude, but you can also make journaling a gratitude exercise, one that you can just do in your mind. But something about writing with your hand can really help unpack its value. And Richard Weissman talks about the science behind this in his book, 59 Seconds. It's really simple. Just take out a piece of paper and write down 10 things that you're grateful for. I mean, how often do you take a minute just to think about things like water, food, a roof over your head, your basic friendship circle? And it's just really, really powerful to remind yourself of that. If you do this for 90 days, I think you are going to rewire your brain, especially if you're suffering lack or scarcity thinking. And it's just really, really powerful to remind yourself and build your procedural memory's ability to remind you on autopilot how good you have it. And if you're watching the internet now, you've got it really good, because just think of all the people who can't even access the internet to this day. Positive affirmations are kind of cool, but I think they're even cooler when you use a journal to do what I call the perfect present exercise. Now, I used to do this and I started in the wrong way, and I think a lot of people will start in the wrong way. So I want to just share this little story where I started to write my perfect present, and I was describing a goal that the girlfriend I had at the time wanted. And I really thought that I was doing a good thing, but I was actually not writing my perfect present. I was writing hers. So after 11 days of writing out this dream that somebody else wanted, I couldn't complete the exercise anymore until I started to be truthful and honest. So the action revealed the lie and then allowed me to correct it. And I mean, it's the craziest thing in the world, but when I finally realized that I just wanted to write books and I wanted to have time to create and teach through writing and later video, it became so much simpler and easier to reflect on how that I might make that true. And it happened really quickly. So I would just suggest that you allow yourself in 3 to 5 sentences to describe that perfect present, and then keep doing it again and again and again, and try and figure out, are you being truthful to what you really want, and shift it over time. I think you'll rewire your brain and find out just how simple it probably is to just start doing the things that will get you what you really want. This is another way of testing things, but I think it's a little bit more refined than having 5 reasons why and 5 reasons why not. Now, the Freedom Journal is not for everyone, but I really like it, and I really only had to use it once in order to rewire my brain to think in a Freedom Journal kind of way. So I think it's well worth exploring, and yeah, I'm just happy to continue to recommend it. But the cool thing is you can essentially reproduce it for yourself once you've done it once. Another cool thing about the Freedom Journal is it lets you do something that is called descriptive to-do listing instead of prescriptive to-do listing. So what I mean by that is if you are prescribing what you have to do during the day, then you're missing out on describing what you did. And this is just a different way of looking at it, but if you track your time in a particular way, then it makes it easier to get off the social media if you have to write down every time that you go on social media. And you know, not everybody's going to want to do that, but it's a discipline that if you can get yourself to do it, it again will rewire your mind, and it just takes a simple pen and pencil. And the Freedom Journal is a really cool way to do that because it lets you do both. It lets you talk about what it is that you want to get done that day, and then later talk about what you did. But ultimately, what I now prefer is using a snapshot journal to just simply do pure descriptive journaling, which says what I did in that day. When I first started doing this, it was a little bit tough, but I did it for a long time, which is just to start 9:10, then the activity 9:30 when the activity stops. And it really made my attention focused on what I was doing, and I stopped losing so much time. And you don't have to memorize things. You can certainly use memory techniques to remember your days and develop your autobiographical memory in that way. But it was so cool because I never had that feeling anymore at the end of the day. Where did all my time go? I saw exactly where it went because I described it. And then I always knew what I needed to do, what were the top priorities, because I had trained my memory so much to just design a life that essentially has patterns and the energy that supports those patterns without really having to do much about it. And as a university student, I'm very grateful that I took everything seriously within semesters so that, you know, I knew when assignments were due and I built my schedule to be ready ahead of those assignment deadlines, which also trained my brain to know what to do without having to constantly check and think, what is it that I want to do? And I wish that I had journaled when I was in university. I probably would have gotten a lot further ahead a lot sooner. So I hope that you take up this descriptive journaling much sooner than I did, because it is explosive with its power, especially when you think about this theme of your energies and your patterns and action reveals, so that you're able to see how to improve them as you go. Now, you don't have to journal exclusively in prose. You can explore techniques like mind mapping. And there are really 3 ways that I use mind mapping, especially when I need a confidence boost. So you can watch the video that I have shared about those 3 techniques. They're really powerful, and I hope that you benefit from them. I'll have the link in the description below. Another thing that I think is really powerful, and you can use mind mapping to do it, is to define your philosophy, your personal philosophy. Now, I am currently preparing, I've been doing this for a long time, it's a big project. It is about philosophy, the philosophy of memory, which includes developing my own personal philosophy, which requires a lot of journaling and not just keeping track of ideas so that I don't have to use my memory techniques that I'd rather use for language learning to remember my own book, but also to craft and define and see what it is that I want to do. And this is really a kind of gathering of material so that it can be sculpted later. This is really, really important. The more you have to sculpt and shape as you develop your own personal philosophy, and if you ever want to write a book of your own. My professor that I had back in the day, his name was Nikita Larry, he told me something that I've never forgotten. He supervised my first MA thesis, I did too, and he said, well, if you want 100,000 words, write 200,000. Now, that sounds pretty crazy, but I think he's right, even if those numbers aren't anything that I ever wound up doing. I have always written more than was necessary, and journaling is a great way to do that because it helps you find what it is that you're trying to say, and it helps you find a means of saying it. Now, speaking of writing entire books and doing things like getting degrees, no one accomplishes anything big and meaningful without running into issues. And rather than react, if you can avoid it, it's a great idea to use a journal to work out a definition of the obstacle that you're facing and alternative ways to handle that. Now, there's an ancient technique I've talked about called ars combinatoria. I got a video on that for you, and it'll be in the description. It involves using a memory wheel, and you can draw a memory wheel in your journal. As Ryan Holiday points out in The Obstacle is the Way, these obstacles can help you see things for what they are, provided that you take the time to examine them, and a memory wheel is a great way to examine them, and I talk there about using a memory wheel in combination with the wrap technique, and it is something that, yeah, it's a little bit weird. It's an ancient memory technique, an ancient thinking technique, and it is really, really powerful, so I hope that you'll explore it. The question really comes down to, where should you store your deep writing about life? And over the years, many people have just asked me, what kind of journal should they use? And I guess it's my Canadian background that has caused me to use the word journal in a variety of ways, because it just means notebook. And I guess it's a Canadian thing where we often talk about this. I keep many, many journals, and they're just notebooks at the end of the day. In addition to this very, very small journal, which I always have in my pocket, I carry it with me everywhere I go, and I've filled out dozens and dozens of them over the years, I have different journals. I have a snapshot journal on my desk that helps me track everything that I do, the descriptive journaling that I talked about. It also helps with practicing accountability. I keep a journal for my music projects, and it says bass on it. Put in there, analysis of modes or scales or things that I've written that I want to be able to learn more about what exactly is coming out of my head. I'm like studying things like maximum angularity and limited hexaphonic transpositions, and this is just a great way to get more value out of that research. So I always recommend, labeling or decorating your journal, and this one says bass because that's what it's for. I also keep a contemplation diary related to my meditation and dreaming practice, and it's not really a slush pile for all those things, but it's just a separate journal for those projects. Now, a lot of people, they see that I have multiple journals and they say, oh, but I'd rather use an app or something so that I don't have a mess and clutter all over the place. Well, I totally get that because clutter is a thing. I've thrown away a lot of journals and so forth, and I'm fine with that. But the reality is I can't speak to using apps because I just don't use them. And the reason that I don't use them is because of the spatial memory benefits of placing information in space halfway through a journal means something. And it just helps my brain think back to where certain things were. I find them a lot faster. There's also the haptic memory benefits of using the hand in this way relative to space. But if you want to use apps and so forth, that's fine. Just experiment with them. And to a certain extent, I do sometimes do a kind of journaling with apps. For example, I will use multiple tabs on a spreadsheet to keep track of a lot of things and references that I just don't want to write out in longhand, and they're so link-based that works. But I don't think that's journaling in the same sense that this is. So I highly recommend that if you have issues with not wanting clutter and so forth, you can explore things like having a box where you keep them in the garage. And what I often do is I have the start date and the end date of each journal that I know I'm going to keep, and I just arrange them as much as possible in chronological order. And the amount of times that I go back and look in them is rather limited, but it's pretty amazing how easy it is to go back and find things because I can generally remember the years. And if you want to learn things like building a mnemonic calendar, I share how to do that in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, and it will help you a little bit more in terms of keeping track of what happens in certain years, certain months, certain seasons, certain days, even certain hours if you have a 00 to 99 PAO and you apply it in that way. I don't always do it, but I do it lightly enough and consistently enough that it really makes it easy to go back and find things, including inside of individual books, because you can apply that same technique to page numbers. Now, I mentioned 3 different ways to use a mind map so that you're able to get even more out of journaling and conquer some of those inner fears that you might be facing. So if you'd like to carry on with that, I always invite you to magneticmerrymethod.com for the full experience, my free memory improvement kit. But I also encourage you to dive in and enjoy this video on 3 ways to use mind mapping as a kind of alternative to journaling so that you can explore your fears, but then find your strengths and your opportunities to apply them so fear doesn't have to rule the roost anymore.